Thank you, George. All right, so we're gonna get started with our assigned subject, which was treasure. And can the lights go down a little? Thanks. Okay, first up, oh, can you still hear me? All right, first up in assigned subject is mother's love.
What a great image to start the night with. This image is very well cropped to capture only the essence of what's important. The child's eyes are in focus, and the relationship of the mother and child's heads in the frame forms a nice diagonal. Although it will look better in the room here, which it does, I found that on my monitor, bringing up the shadows gave us a better view of the child's face, and decreasing the brightness of the highlights also improved the image. Thanks for sharing.
The artist is Bill Osowski. Next up is treasure trove.
So I really like the warm tones of this image. There are a lot of repeated shapes. The strong vertical lines work really well in this case because the frets, I think they're called, they have horizontal, whatever these things are called. Yeah, frets. Thank you. So they, it's like all these lines, they create like these repeating patterns. Which is also kind of found in the amps. You've got the front lines, you've got this line here, and then, so and then there's sort of, this creates kind of like a frame for the central area. And so there's a lot of detail on the outer area, and then the inner area is less detailed. But it also has like a lot of linear contrast with the curving lines and the repeated shapes of the guitar bodies. And altogether, they kind of create these shapes that are kind of like hints at like flames, like the classic flames that you might see on, in a classic car or something. But, to me, that kind of like speaks to the inner fire of creativity, and music is indeed a true treasure. I have no suggestions for improvement.
The artist is Dave McClellan. And last one in the category, precious cargo.
I was blown away by the similarity of this image to the first image of the night. We are all related in the love of mothers. Also, taking a cue from the first image, I don't think the context of the surrounding forest is important to the essence of this image, so I suggest a much closer crop into just the mother and child. Similarly, while it will look okay on the too bright screen here in the room, which it does, on my calibrated monitor, basically the whole arm and chest of the mother was completely black. So taking it as a cue that it looks good here in the room, the image is probably a little too dark. And there's a lot of nice detail there, as you can see. I just love those eyes. Thanks.
The artist is Anita Duprat. Moving into the abstract, first image is Rain and Rock.
So I love the blue-green shimmery color right at the very top and a little bit in the middle too. And so based on the title, this is probably rain, but I can't quite figure out what creates the solid blue-green shimmery patch. Is it a reflection? Is it looking through something? I also can't get quite a sense of scale, so this is pretty successful for abstract. There are a lot of different contrasts within the rock, smooth and rough, soft and hard, shiny and matte, cool and warm, and this creates some really great visual interest. Again, my favorite areas were the shiny parts, and yes, I wish there was more of them in the image, or to really help emphasize the contrast between the rain and the rock, crop tighter into that area. So like maybe like there, just get in tight on that. I think this is a very pleasant image, and thank you for sharing.
The artist is Jim Baird. Next, reflection.
As I've sat inside over the last month of endless rain, this is the kind of photo I might have dreamed of capturing. Many times artifacts from lens and processing issues detract from a photo, but in this image, there are additions and enhancements. I especially love the flashes in the center left and the lower right that add just a little more sparkle to the image. I found that to my eye, increasing the contrast of the image added a little more appeal to it, but overall, an excellent abstract image.
And the artist is Ginny Marchio. Next, Nature's Canvas.
What I like about this image is that a sense of scale isn't immediate. The barnacles at the bottom do give a little bit of an idea, but the size of barnacles can also vary wildly. Without the shadows, it would be hard to tell the direction of the wear pattern of the rock. And what I find striking about the rock is that it's similar to the wear pattern of certain types of shells, such as abalone or clam. I think the contrast is at a good level for this image, and I also think black and white was a smart choice because by removing the color, it puts more emphasis upon the line, shape, and form. My eye stays within the frame and often settles on the oblong shape placed at the 1/3 line. And I have no suggestions for improvement, and thank you for sharing me.
Artist is Kathy Triolo. Next up, rainbow ice on Banner Mountain.
The photographer did a superb job of composing this image, choosing a framing so that the curves and rays keep our eyes moving around, but not exiting the image. The iridescent colors grab and keep our interest, and the rich browns in the image are pleasing. The engineer in me wants to talk about the difference between pigmented color and structural color, but I'll skip it in the interest of time and just say that this image really shines.
Artist is Tom Quinn. Next, my website.
The photographer did a good job of capturing the spider web at just the right moment to make it really stand out. I could immediately tell what it was, and I find the soft bokeh of the background to be more of an abstraction than the spider web. To make the image more of an abstraction, I would recommend playing with the crop or getting in a lot closer. There is almost a heart shape right up here. Yeah, that's kind of that's an interesting shape. And so the image file is a bit low resolution, and I'm not quite sure where the issue arose along the line. But the photographer might want to go back to the original source and work with that. Or if that's not an option, just lean hard into the flaws. Maybe zoom in extremely tight and experiment with the pixelated look. I have a friend in Alaska. I'm not sure what's causing that. Okay, the whole interference. Okay, all right, this seems to be better now. Anyway, I have a friend in Alaska who makes images with a 90s Game Boy camera and with highly pixelated in their show roll. And so that is something to consider. Right? Thank you for sharing.
Artist is June Anderson. Next, we have headlight.
When people create interesting industrial designs, not only the whole, but many of the details of the design will be agreeable. This old car is a great example, with its intersecting lines and curves that the photographer has framed so well. And the grumpy old guy in me harkens back to a time when headlights were pleasingly round and not so darn bright like they are today. I found this image to be in a sort of limbo of saturation, especially since it's in the abstract category and not trying for realism. And I like the image much better with both less saturation and more saturation. And I encourage the photographer to explore those horizons of abstraction. Finally, I like the use of vignetting in this image.
Artist is Robert Arnold. Next, we have woven wavelengths.
So the first things I was drawn to were the color palette, which is a nice mixture of warm and cool tones, and the strong vertical lines that are filled with energy. Some quite literally, because some of these lines were created with light. The lines create a repetition of shapes, yet they have a lot of variety in their textures, and this creates a feeling of depth. Even though there are bright lines that go to the edge of the frame, the heaviest visual weight in this is in the center, so it keeps my eye in the frame. The only comment I have for a possible improvement would be to make the single bright white line less bright because it keeps pulling my eye more than anything else in the image. I tried cropping it out, but the image does need that visual weight on the left. So I would just try maybe darkening it down a little, or maybe even a clone tool to just like add in a little the color and texture. But overall, I really enjoyed this image. Thank you.
The artist is Mike Oitzman. Next, Ripple Reverie.
This image works as an abstract because it rides the knife edge between elements we recognize and elements we can get lost in. The crisp circular ripples draw us in and then lead us to set sail into the gratifying blues and whites of the reflections. The image has a very warm color balance, and I thought to correct this by cooling the temperature of it, but when I did, it added too much realism. It's great the way it is. Thanks for drawing us into the blue.
And that artist is Rachel Rosenthal. Next, White Bird.
At first, I thought this was just a reflection of a scene in waters that were not still. But after a few minutes of careful study, I think that this is at least a double exposure, one with intentional camera movement, ICM, because there are parts of the image that are just a little too textured to be just reflection of the soil.
Not, it's just a picture of a reflection of a bird in the water.
Okay.
Artist, Melanie Trusa. Did you want to, I didn't mean to.
I did have more comments.
Yeah, you
but-
can finish. I was just kidding.
All right, where were we? Okay, all right. Anyhow, so the effect is lovely and slightly surreal. It feels like an impressionistic painting of a quiet scene on a lake on marsh, probably wintertime because of the muted, cool, and earthy color palette. The tree creates a diagonal line to help draw the eye through the image. The negative space on the left gives space for the white bird to be a clear subject, which also has diagonal lines created by its wings. I wouldn't make any changes to this very successful image.
On to the next image, water architecture. Oh, it was Eleni Prusa, was the artist. Sorry, I thought people heard me the first time. Water architecture.
This image translates the man-made into something almost organic, like a storm is tearing at the edges of reality, where atomic disintegration is imminent, like the fractal microscopic world is made manifest in the macro, like we shouldn't look too hard into that abyss. My prejudices fought to force my hand to increase the contrast slider to get richer and blacker blacks, but I respect the artist's choices and resist. A very fine photograph indeed.
And the artist is Laura Greenman. And that wraps up abstract. So we're on to architecture. First is interior of the Duomo at Siena.
I visited this church nearly 30 years ago, but I instantly knew that it was the Siena Duomo because of the phenomenal graphic quality of the black and white marble. The photographer did a good job showing the large scale, a sense of place with all the incredible details, and the focus is sharp. I feel that a lot of the elements in this image are kind of competing for attention. The ceiling and the round window are cut up at the edges of the frame. There are a lot of very strong diagonal lines running in different directions. There are green and yellow and blue casts in the shadows, which can be partly attributed to the very challenging lighting conditions. The bright spotlights in the window are blown out, and the dark areas were pulled up a lot, which resulted in noise. However, I think that a way to make this image stronger would be to reduce the competition between elements. Try converting the image to black and white, and that'll really emphasize that gorgeous graphic quality. Just denoise it, try removing some of the spots and play with the cropping. See how you like it without the round window at the bottom. Maybe it's a little off of the left side, but I still really love this image because it made me happy to look at. So.
Artist is Jonathan Feingold. Next is Andalusia.
I love the sinuous sidewalks and drain leading us into this photo. You get a great sense of 3D perspective and a wonderful range of tonality. However, the image is subverted by the bright blown out wall in the upper right that hijacks our eyes away from the goodness in the lower 80% of the image. There's nothing up there contributing much to the image anyway. Cropping to just below the blown out upper wall, in my opinion, completely transforms this image from something with a deep fault into a balanced, brilliant, and beautiful black and white image. It also opens up a world of possibilities for fine-tuning the tonality that weren't there before. I urge the artist to explore this suggestion and try to make the image even finer.
The artist is Natalia Konoto. Next is the Forum Baths at Pompeii.
I found this image to be delightfully unsettling. Normally in architecture photography, it's recommended to have at least one line that is straight, and none of these are, but it works. There is one that's close, and the rest are at a disconcerting angle. But especially knowing that this is Pompeii, because it makes these statues look like they're in a comfortable losing battle to fight off the crushing darkness that is coming down. It looked much darker on my computer at home, so it was much more dramatic. But this crushing blackness is just like the ash that fell from the sky thousands of years ago and buried the city. The diagonal line is well placed and it draws the eye through the image. Speaking of eyes, it looks like the one in the front has a red pupil, and I kind of dig how spooky that looks. Being in low light, it looks like there's a little noise, or it could just be the quality of the image file. And I do wish the feet in the foreground were in focus, but they still don't take away from that haunting quality of this image that I really enjoyed spending time in.
The artist is Jonathan Feingold. Next, door of Quaker building.
I love the rich saturated greens on brick red of this image and how nature is striving to reclaim what we've built. One of my personal rules of thumb is if I'm centering the main subject of an image in the frame, there must be a good reason for it. Offsetting a main subject in a frame almost always improves the composition. I think this image is one where I would heed that rule of thumb by cropping all four edges to a greater or lesser degree to offset the door as the main subject and eliminate unimportant or distracting elements. I wish our critiquing process allowed me to show you an example or two, but I encourage the photographer to pursue other cropping possibilities with this image.
The artist is Patricia Levitan. For our last image, it looks like this one was submitted without a title.
This feels very Parisian. Maybe it's one of the smaller areas of the Musée d'Orsay. I've always loved a mix of old and new architecture, and I really like the subject because it gives a good sense of place, and it's somewhere I'd like to be. The exposure is good, there are some technical issues to be addressed. The horizontal lines are slightly skewed to the left. This is particularly evident at the top edge of the frame, and that can be easily straightened. I would like to see what this looks like at the top of the pyramid, at the very top included. And tilting the lens up slightly would also make the vertical lines of the front of the image a bit straighter. This is a minor issue, but the vertical lines, sorry, I'm very tired. This is a minor issue, but the vertical lines can be easily fixed, and straight verticals can add to the formality of this composition. The file quality has some issues with resolution and pixelation, and it gives the people in the image a slight outline. It's an interesting effect, but it doesn't work with the intent of the image. I might also suggest cropping a little bit off of the left side.
The artist is Angela Apostol. Next, we move into our new birds category. And first is green heron in my palm.
The photographer has skillfully captured this heron with its face and especially its eye in focus, and I must say that I love the bright yellow intensity of the heron's eye. The centered composition again brings to mind my rule of thumb about offsetting the subject, and the picture might also be improved with vignetting. When I critique, you'll frequently hear me suggest vignetting, and it will be one of my themes tonight, unfortunately, for you all. It's one of the easiest ways to move a photograph from a snapshot to more like fine art. And speaking for myself, I'm not vignetting most of the photograph, either just a touch or quite a bit, especially those with single subjects like birds. I need a good reason not to. It's just part of my standard processing. Thanks for sharing.
The artist is Eleni Crusoe. Next is Fat and Happy Bald Eagle.
This is a great shot. The eagle is in nice sharp focus with lots of details. The background is nicely blurred and the colors even match the eagle's feathers. The light nicely highlights patterns in the eagle's feathers, and there is a touch of a catchlight in its eye, which is also nice, sharp, and detailed. When I took a close look at the beak to figure out what the white patches on there are, I saw that the edges on the outside of and the tip of the beak looked a little odd. I guess it was either that there was some editing that wasn't completely cleaned up, or that the eagle moved slightly during exposure, or maybe the light hit it at an odd angle. The tip almost looks like there's a water droplet hanging off of it, and there's a bokeh spot right in that same area that I find slightly distracting. The white patches on the beak look natural, and I see no reason to edit that out. I'm nitpicking because the beak is, excuse me, turn the page, turn the page, turn the page. It's such a strong feature of the eagle's face, and it should be free of distractions, especially if this were to be printed out, for which it is will be. I also play with the cropping, maybe shape a little bit off of the line. And this is a great shot. Thank you.
The artist is Daniel Chaplin. Next is Great Egret.
I like the high contrast feel of this image, like we used to get with Kodachrome slides. The bright white and orange of the egret stands out against the vivid saturated background colors. The bird is expertly captured in focus. While the egret is not technically centered, my opinion is that the composition would be strengthened by offsetting even more by cropping a little bit off the right. Finally, the application of a little vignetting might also strengthen an already fine image.
And the artist is Desert Powell. Next is Bird.
I always appreciate a good square crop, and I think this was the best choice for this composition. There is a bit of a diagonal, the bird's body repeats that diagonal line, and there's plenty of space for the bird to look into. And there is an obvious catchlight in its eye, and there's a good separation of the bird from the background. The photographer handled the lighting well, but the focus is very soft, and the image file appears to be of a low quality, which might be due to cropping in quite a lot. I do think it's too soft to try running it through a sharpening program like Topaz, but a way to work with this image would be to push the focus even softer and do something creative with it. Maybe you make it look like an impressionistic painting, or go crazy and try cubism. I would also edit out the blue spots of sky in the upper left corner, and I see good potential for transforming the image into something fun and creative.
The artist is Sheila Ryan. Next, we have Green Heron on the Moon.
This is a great example of how offsetting the subject in the frame makes for a much more effective composition. The side profile of the bird with its raised crown feathers and the movement of the bird also adds interest to the image. Also, speaking of vignetting, this is a great example of how vignetting could improve an image and focus a viewer on the main subject. See how the bright vegetation continues right to the edge of the frame all the way around, and how the photo feels a little bright overall? The application of vignetting, and in this case, having vignetting, in my opinion, would take this good photo and make it awesome.
And the artist is Emily Weissman. Next, we have Winter Hunting on the Farm.
When I first saw this image, my eye almost immediately went to the eagle's face and met its intense gaze. Even though the focus is a little soft, the composition and the intensity make up for it, and it could always be run through a sharpening program. What I think is successful about the other parts of the composition is the diagonal line of the eagle's wingspan, and that emphasizes its movement and action. The wagon wheel and the post in the foreground are interesting because while minimalist, it still gives some context about what kind of farm, where it might be, and it shows how close to the ground the eagle is. The blurred wintry background gives another visual clues to location. I wager the Eastern Sierras. I have no suggestions for improvement on this lovely image. Nice work, thank you.
The artist is John Siebert. Next, we have Gray Lodge.
As a man who hunted waterfowl as a kid, the sight of geese preparing to land still makes my heart beat faster. The photographer has captured the excitement of the moment quite well, and it looks like post-processing was used effectively to make the subject stand out from the background. There are technical issues due to motion that the photographer has used just the right amount of sharpening to improve, and I'd be tempted to remove the wingtip just above the upper bird's head, but it's still a compelling image. I found that vignetting improved the image further.
And the artist is Gary Kreitstapper. Next, an artist's palette.
I can see why the photographer titled this artist's palette for the wild variety of color that the rainbow, for the wild, oh gosh, sorry guys. And it is a very striking, colorful subject. The focus on the bird, and especially its eye, is tack sharp, and then it nicely falls away into bokeh. There's a good catch light in the eye, and the lighting is nice and soft and help makes the colors pop. The only quibble I have is that the branch is really bright. Knowing that the projector will make the images look brighter, I cranked up the brightness of my own monitor. The branch might be too blown out to recover, but perhaps the photographer can try to bring it down a bit, and then if maybe there's another image of the branch, or you can try using a clone tool or on opacity to bring in a little more detail from it. Otherwise, a successful image of a lovely bird. Thank you.
The artist is Ed Sylvester. And the next photo is next.
Wow, I love the crisp sharpness of the hawk in this photo and that predatory glare. You can feel its muscles tense to spring out after prey. Note also the exquisite offset composition in this image and the inclusion of the nicely curved branches to balance the subject. Post-processing has been effectively used to darken the background sky so that it doesn't feel blank. I think the only suggestion I could make to polish this image further is to add a little vignetting. When I did it on my screen, I almost gasped how it really made the image pop. Great job.
And artist is Ray Bellone. And next, Tranquil Waters.
So I really don't know that much about birds, but I've never seen birds quite like these before, with this coloring and those crazy looking pink dinosaur legs. So, but they were, so that was the first thing I noticed. But I think this composition works well to keep the focus, keep your eye into the frame, keep the focus on them. They're placed comfortably within the frame. I mean, the photographer could even crop in a little top on the sides and bring even more emphasis if that would be their intention. But this cropping works well too, because they take up about 2/3 of the vertical space. There are a few bright spots in the back that could be brought down and phoned out. Right. So that what I really like, the nice still reflections. I think that it's a nice, effective reflection. The photographer did a great job telling the birds how to pose. And this, and I really like the little diagonal line created by the piece of wood that they're on, and then it kind of continues down. So you've got this really kind of interesting zigzag that'll draw your eye up in there and through that vertical. I don't have any other comments for improvement, and thank you for sharing this fun image.
The artist is Ed Sylvester. Fauna category next is, and the first one is zebra close up.
If I ever do a photo safari, images like this if I ever do a photo safari, images like this are the ones I would strive to capture. I always endeavor to capture views that are rarely seen of a common subject. So this photo strikes at the heart of what I'm after in my own photography. I submitted a similar image of an elephant a month or two ago, and I think this photo has an effective composition. I do feel, however, to make this photo really work, we need to see more detail in the zebra's eye, which we see a little more of on the bright screen in the room here. The detail is there, even in the low-res JPEGs we get, I can bring up the shadows and see details. The photo is also a little soft and might also be improved with judicious sharpening. Thanks for sharing.
The artist is Desert Powell. Next, we have Lioness and her tree waking from a nap.
So while trying to write out my comments, I had my own little house lion draped on my arm in nearly the same position. What I love about this image is that just how it underlines that a cat is a cat. She is regal, composed, and since all the lines in this tree lead to her, she is clearly the center of the universe. The lines of the tree go every which way, but that gives them movement and energy, and this is in contrast to this alert stillness of this girl. The focus is appropriately sharp, the crop is proportional to the subject, the lighting is soft and muted, which seems to suit her mood, but she still has the catchlight in her eye. I thought her right ear had a little, had a tag on it. But on closer inspection, it's just a spot of sky. And she actually, if you can look really zoom in, she actually has a little tiny notch in her hair too. But I'd recommend cloning out that bright spot, especially if this is printed, and as well as adding a little bit of a vignette, Ruth, to draw even more focus to this beautiful.
Artist is John Siebert. Next, we have This One's Mine.
All the important parts of this photo were skillfully captured in focus by the photographer. The eyes, the nose, the fish, and the ears. The composition is excellent, except that I could wish for just a little more room above the bear's right ear in the frame. The saturated red of the bear's bloody lips really adds a marvelous element to the photo. The photo feels a touch over-sharpened in the fur, and I also found that vignetting significantly improved the image to my eye. Thanks for bringing us this cool catch.
The artist is Janice Rosner. Next up, Camouflage.
So this is a well-titled image because it took me a few seconds to find the lizard. My personal preference for contrast and black-white images skews towards strong contrast, but in this case, I feel that the flatter contrast does make for more effective camouflage because the tones blend together a little bit more. What else makes this effective camouflage is all the textures in this image. Much of it is rough, tough, and spiky. There's nothing soft in this image, which helps emphasize the rough, spiky texture of this really cool lizard. The sense of scale is interesting because I'm not entirely sure how big this lizard or how big the debris is, but I would wager that it's probably 2 to 3 feet long. In all the chaos, there is some sense of order because there is a kind of a circle that is formed by the debris. Sorry, I just lost my space, but anyway, but yeah, and then it shows that the lizard is at the bottom of that circle, and it just further emphasizes how well that he blends into the scene. Nice work, thank you.
The artist is June Anderson. Next, Clasping Dragonfly.
This photo has a fantastic composition with its crossing diagonals, and the depth of field is perfectly chosen to get all of the subject and the grass blade in crisp focus while dropping the background to pleasing bokeh fuzz. The catchlight in the dragonfly's eye nicely echoes the white patches in the wings. And thank you to the photographer for splendidly using vignetting to take this photo to the next level. Outstanding.
The artist is Brian Dunbar. And next we have Whale.
So this is a great example of a subject in relation to the horizon line, which, by the way, is nice and straight, thank you. There are 3 subjects here, the sky, the sea, and the whale. What makes the whale the primary subject is, well, it's in the center of the image. It's a diagonal line that moves up and through the image. It has the most action, but it is also quite literally rises up from the bottom of the image to well above the horizon line, placing it in a dominant position. The whale's height above the horizon also gives the viewer a sense of scale and emphasizes its enormous size and how powerful it is to achieve such height. Imagine how different this image would look if the whale barely rose above the horizon line or never rose above. The shutter speed was quick enough to freeze the action, and I think this is sharp. The image quality of the file seems a little on the low side. This may have already been cropped in quite a bit, but it does seem to be sharp. If this were my image, I might throw on a touch of vignette, but that doesn't detract from a good image. Nice job, thank you.
The artist is Dave Connell. And then last in this category is Nudibranch Solomon C. Papua New Guinea.
This is a gorgeous photo of the subject captured in difficult conditions. And I must say that in the bright screen, it takes the image back a notch or two. It looks much better on my screen when I was reviewing it. Underwater photography is a whole different skill set that I don't think I could ever fathom. But the photographer is obviously thoroughly skilled in it, captures such a stunning image. I love the wavy blue on gold ridge all along the top of the creature. The composition breaks the rule of thumb about centering, but is this an exception? One could debate it, but to my eye, I don't think so. I tried cropping some off the left and thought it improved the image. Very fine.
And the artist is Mark Davis. Next, Flora. First up, Pea Slowly Flower.
This is a rather fascinating shape because of how prominent the spiky phallic thing is. I actually had to look it up, see what it's called. It's called a spadix, so you're welcome. There is a pleasant balance between focus and bokeh. The lighting is soft, beautiful, and is a nice contrast to the rough texture of the spadix. The tonal range is just gorgeous. There are a lot of leading lines from the leaf to the spadix. The leaf, But it could be also argued that they fan out behind like an Art Deco costume. There's a very cool effect, and if this were my image, I would try bringing down that lighter stripe down a bit. It was more prominent on my screen. But I would try to bring it down a little bit and try and match the tonal range around it. But it can also argue that it might kind of mirror this little black shape right there as well. But there is also something appealing about that slider. Anyway, overall, this is a gorgeous image and it is nicely executed.
The artist is Robert Arnold. Next we have spring spring cactus flowers.
Oh goody, more sexy plant parts. But the composition of this photo is quite good, with the blooms and buds fitting nicely in the frame. I like how the greens of the pistils contrast with the reds of the petals and the pinks of the stamens. And I like the contrast of the round blooms in front of the spiky thorns. There is not sufficient depth of field to capture all of the blooms in photo. And unfortunately, the largest and the closest in the lower left is a little bit soft. Next time, the photographer might try to get that most prominent one in focus or use a higher f-stop. The needles in the lower right, and looking at it on the screen, in fact, all the way along the bottom, are distractingly bright. And the photo might be improved by local darkening in the lower right or along the bottom, or more easily just by using vignetting. Thanks.
The artist is Gary Emanuel. Next, we have Coastal Douglas Iris.
So this is a very pleasing image. The colors on my screen were much richer and more saturated. This washes it out a little bit. But I've said it before, and I'll say it again, that I love a good spring crop. And I think this was a good choice for the subject to help create a good composition. The individual irises have a vaguely triangular shape, and together they form a triangular shape to create mega iris. But seriously, that repetition of shape is well seen because the triangular shape is in an angle. It creates diagonals that help keep the eye moving throughout the image, and there's a comfortable amount of space between the mega iris shape and the edge of the image. There's also good color contrast. Purple and green aren't complementary colors like green and red are, and these are shades both skewed towards cool tones, but those little pops of yellow with the purple really warms it up, as does the sunlight that hits the irises. The green grass is nicely saturated, dark enough in most areas not to compete with the bright irises. And I like that some of the blades are at a diagonal to give it some subtle background energy. To make this stronger, I would bring down the straight and slightly brighter blades at the top. And again, I monitored this blood. This was much darker on the background, but it was a lovely image.
Artist is Daniel Chaplin. And then last one in this category, Madrone Leaves 2024, #1.
I had a visceral reaction to this photo when it came up. Something like, ooh, that's a picture I'd put on my wall. Those languid, sensual, and rich colors are a feast for my color receptors. The black spots add visual interest, texture, and contrast. Judicious post-processing has been used to enhance all of the qualities of this photo without going too far. And finally, vignetting has been used compellingly to aid the composition and polish the photo to perfection. Fantastic.
And the artist is Mike Shea. Moving into natural landscape, first we have Waiting for Spring.
The lighting on this is very soft and even, and it really helps make that green pop and show that the promise of spring is right in the corner. The focus is sharp throughout the scene, and And the repetitive lines create a very strong geometric pattern to this landscape that I find very pleasing. It also creates a contrast between the geometric and the organic forms that will soon be growing and expanding into the shape. The straight line cutting through is placed at roughly about the third line. Personally, I would place that even higher up in the frame and made it straight because that would put more emphasis on the curves in the foreground, which I find the most interesting and energetic, and that's what I responded to the most. But I still enjoyed spending time with this image. Thank you.
The artist is Patricia Levitan. Next is Coal Canyon Falls after much rain.
This photo is a magnificent exercise in fine art landscape photography. There's the lovely curve of the cliffs into the distance, giving three-dimensionality, / pure white by the dramatic power of the waterfall and the evening light. There's the offset horizon, sharp in the distance, with beautiful multiple cloud layers, also giving perspective and three-dimensionality. There is sufficient depth of field to achieve focus front to back, and tonality management to capture both shadow and highlight details. Finally, there is skillful post-processing, including vignetting, to bring out details and balance the different elements of the photograph. Excellent.
The artist is Eric Ingalls. Next is Maui Sunset.
So this looks like where we should all be in these chillier days. I like the subject, the big puffy clouds that add texture and interest to the sky, and the water does create some negative space in the middle of the scene with a lot of detail. There is a peaceful, relaxing feeling to this image that I like. There's some technical issues with the image file. There's a lot of noise in the areas that were in shadow and then brought up. And then on the trunks of the palm trees, right about here, there is a brighter area that corresponds to the rock behind it. I would recommend trying running this through a denoise program and then going back to make the brighter areas of the trunk match the rest of the trunk. And I was zooming in on the details. It naturally cropped the image, and I actually like to crop her about maybe a bit, something a quarter, like crop it right about there. Because that tree is very prominent and it doesn't add much to the scene. And I think cropping it out puts more emphasis on the beach, the water, and the two people enjoying this beach sunset, like I should be. Thanks for helping me plan my next vacation and for sharing your work.
The artist is Garrett Emanuel. Next is South Fork Bridge, Threatening Skies.
This photo is well composed, with a shining, sinuous river giving perspective, geometric lines of the bridge contrasting with the organic trees, and puffy clouds to add interest to the sky. All of the elements of a great landscape photo are there, but I could have wished for the bridge to be just a little farther from the ridge line and for the bare winter trees to not be blocking the shine of the river. Too bad the trail wasn't planned with landscape photos in mind, or that a different shooting perspective wasn't easily found. In post-processing, the photo feels overall flat to my eye because the shadows have been brought up too much. And in my opinion, the temperature has been slid too far to the warm side. It doesn't feel natural to my eye. Finally, I found a little vignetting helps the photo a lot.
The artist is Henry Goodman. Next, Golden State of Mind.
Beaches. Why you gotta tease me like that? I was quickly drawn into the relationship between the glowing kelp in the foreground and the golden sun setting in the background. There's a direct line in between the two, which really emphasized by the path of light reflecting off the water and the wet sand. My eye bounces back and forth like a pinball, and eventually slowed when I spent more time looking at other details, another clump of golden kelp, a rock that mimics the shapes of the kelp, and the other rocks and sand have a wave pattern like the water, which creates some very pleasing repetitive shapes and creates a deeper relationship between the elements of the image. The highlights are not blown out, except for maybe the center of the sun, which is perfectly appropriate and it's totally fine. And the darker areas, well, look fine here. And my next comment was to suggest that maybe the photographer is compensating for the brightness of the projector, which I have done myself. So the horizon line is just a little shy of being straight, but that's a simple fix. And overall, it was a very successful image. Thank you for sharing.
The artist is Paul King. Next is Last Glint of Autumn Gold at Burney Falls.
This image breaks the compositional rule of thumb about centering the main subject in a photograph, but is it an exception? Yes, but why? The falls are twin but nicely asymmetric. There are very different elements on the far left and on the far right. But mostly there is a fine U-shaped wide-angle lens effect happening with the boulders along the bottom. The beautiful sun star adds asymmetry, and finally that tree on the hump in the upper center is just begging to be centered in the frame. With panoramic framing, any propping to my eye feels unbalanced, so the centered composition just feels right in this photo. Very well done.
The artist is Allison Colt. Next, we have Gray Lodge Reflection.
This is a very pleasant scene, and the first thing I noticed was that the horizon line is in the middle, which is appropriate in this case because the emphasis is on the reflection and of those enormous puffy clouds, which dwarf the buttes below and gives a sense of scale to the scene. And the scale is also helped by the trees in front. The one branch at the very top kind of distracted my eye because it's both in and out of the frame, and it sits up higher than the clouds. The top you can actually crop a little bit off the top, and that would take care of it. And but the clouds are nicely handled, they're not blown out. And I like that the reflected clouds have a nice rippled texture below. The foliage around the water frames the water and and the rippled clouds. The grassy area on the right, it's either they had shadows pulled up or there was some light that little bright, but it felt a little noisy on my monitor, and I felt like maybe adding a little contrast back in or bringing it down a touch, or even adding a little bit of a vignette could help that. All in all, a nice image that feels like a peaceful day. Thank you for sharing.
The artist is, excuse me, is Gary Karstubner. Next, and I may not pronounce this correctly, so I apologize, but it's Mozioa Tunya Magic.
This is another well-composed landscape photo. The wedge of foreground vegetation gives occlusion that helps with three-dimensionality, and the rainbow and multiple falls are placed fittingly in the frame. The horizon is offset, and the wonderful cloud deck also gives perspective with a lot of cool blue sky showing through. The photo has a few technical issues though. It's overall too bright, and it's going to look extra bright in the room here. I pulled both the highlight and shadow sliders in Lightroom far to the left and got a much more pleasing result to my eye. A look at the plants in the lower left and in front of the rainbow shows distracting artifacts, either from over sharpening or from masking, that in my opinion needs to be dialed back a notch or two. I love those rainbow colors.
And the artist is Ray Vallone. Next is Edith Creek, Mount Rainier.
I really like the way that this one makes me feel because it makes me think of the countless spring and summertime hikes that I've been on. And the bright, crisp, and pleasantly saturated colors are very appealing and harmonious. The focus is crisp all the way through. The midday light doesn't create harsh shadows, and the photographer handled the exposure very well. The scene tells a story of the environment. Snow melt from the mountains trickle down in cool streams, flowers bloom, and the trail invites the viewer to follow it up and deeper into the scene. Hey, why not go all the way to the top of that looming mountain that's just covered in snow ice? It's not that, right? The snow does not look blown out on my monitor. This was an enjoyable image to spend time with, and I think it's very nicely done. Thank you.
The artist is Gary Wade. Just a couple more in this category. Aegina.
All of the landscape photos I've critiqued tonight have great compositions, and this image continues that trend. The boat is perfectly offset horizontally with its mast nicely bisecting the sun patch. The horizon is skillfully offset vertically, and the cloud shadow gives a perfect diagonal, almost as if the boat were casting it. The sense of light in the clouds is awesome. On my calibrated monitor, the image is too dark, but it will probably look just about right here in the room, which it does, which is also an indicator that the original is too dark. Finally, note how vignetting focuses your eye on the important elements and keeps your eye in the frame, although I can't tell if it's accidental or intentional. Very nice.
The artist is Natalia Konyoto. And finally, Magical Bishop Canyon.
This is an aptly named image because it is a magical place. The beautiful bright fall colors pop against the rocks. Everything has a warm tone, but the contrast in texture and brightness give it good separation. The scene is sharp and the exposure is well handled. My favorite thing about this image is the spiral shape that, depending on your preference and perspective, begins with the line of trees at the top, makes its way down, curves down around the bottom, comes back up again, and then goes in the waterfall. I do wish the photographer had tilted the lens up just a hair to give a little more room here, or you could just, edit out some of the bushes right there, or then maybe, you could crop a little bit off the bottom, and you can crop a little off the right-hand side to really emphasize that spiral, but leaving it as is probably would be fine. And you can even add in a little vignette to really emphasize this. But overall, this is a really lovely scene and nice drawing.
Artist is Dave McClellan. Next, we have night photography, just a couple entries here. First one, chaotic 13 seconds of driving on the Champs-Élysées.
Compositionally, I first asked myself if the right edge of this photo should be cropped to make the arch building perfectly centered and to call the composition an exception to the rule of thumb. And my answer is yes, since it crops the distracting lights off the right edge. And the real meat of this photo is the chaotic car lights in the lower third of the image. The arch is more of a supporting foundation. The photo is also too dark to my eye on my monitor, but it will look good in the room here, which it does. Let me say that I really love this photo because it's not just a tourist photo. It shows us a view of an icon that we have seen before, that we have not seen before, and it's well executed. Nice job.
The artist is George Pelpel. And next, you can lead a horse to water, but if it dies, you have to walk home.
This is a beautifully crafted image. The foreground is perfectly lit. The lighting on the horse skeleton helps it stand out, but not so much that it doesn't feel like it's becoming part of the rocks and returning to the earth. I like that the Milky Way is vertical, and it even aligns with the rib cage, and the long narrow crop really enforces this long line. I do feel it's like a touch long and a little bit could be cropped, might be cropped off the top. But I really think a little cropped off the bottom just to kind of meet up with that little notch on the bottom there. I think it was smart to leave some neutral space between the rocks in the background here. You can still some detail, but it is there, but it's not distracting from the Milky Way and the horse skeleton. This touches on themes of life, death, and our place in the universe. Excellent work.
Artist is Allison Colt. Moving into our people category, first up, 22 loses the ball.
This photo made me laugh because I played basketball at about the same age as these boys and I sucked at it. So poor number 22 is like a version of my younger self. This is a well-composed and well-executed action photograph. The shutter speed is sufficiently fast to have almost no action blur. The composition, with my loser younger self jammed awkwardly to the right edge and the ball thief given room to blaze to the goal, somehow captures and contains the shifting momentum of the scene very well. Finally, the high contrast modern post-processing look amplifies the drama. Brilliant.
And the artist is Barbara Summers. Next is Butts on the Rocks.
Which that kind of sounds like you drink, you get at the bars. Little ice on. The exposure is well handled in a bright midday summer sun. I don't see anything that's blown out or anything that's too dark, and the scene is nice and sharp. The water, in proportion to the rest of the scene, works really well, enough to show up that gorgeous color and inviting coolness, and it makes a natural contrast to the warmth of the sun and the light on those butts. I like that there are 3 people that are close in body type because it creates a nice repetition of form, but yet each has variety and individual characteristics. and that they are at different heights within the frame and kind of descend. That helps create the line to help pull your eye, a line of butts. Yes, to draw your eye through the image. So the top girl's face, she's the only one you can really see that her eye looks into the scene, so that helps keep your eye within the scene. The only distracting elements that I found were these bags at the top. I thought they were, I think mainly it was the color that drew my eye, and quick fix would just to desaturate that rather than try to go to the effort of removing them. Maybe throw it over there.
The artist is Jimmy Marchio. Next is Marion's Fire Rehearsal.
The photo is a mini masterclass in people composition. The arrangement of heads and the depth of field gives perspective, a sense of depth, and pleasing head placements for our eyes to explore. It's very fantastic. There's one face clear and full, while the others are profiled and harder to read. And the bearded man's expression is delightfully enigmatic. Is he impatient, respectful, anticipatory, maybe a small hint of disgust? We don't know. We study the other faces for clues and find almost nothing. And we have just a hint of text on the page. Is it script or is it music? I tried this photo in black and white and liked it even better. And I encourage the photographer to give it a try since it strips it even more to the essence of composition and expression. Superb.
The artist is Douglas Hooper. Next is Sierra and Sophie.
This is a very sweet image. I love the soft and light, love the lighting. Their faces and eyes are sharp with catch lights, and their eyes, they actually form like a line, like a curving line. So it kind of creates a relationship between them. I mean, it further emphasizes it. The background is blurred and is predominantly green, and that works well with their coloring. I like that the dark-haired girl has a white shirt and that the blonde girl has a dark shirt to give the suggestion of yin and yang. I really appreciate that their skin is left natural because they have such a really lovely glow. And some of that comes from within, and the smile, and you can see in their smile, and the smile reaches their eyes. The blonde does have an obvious zit on her chin, and a little tiny one on her left cheek. And these are very easy fixes with a few clicks of a foam brush. The brunette's left eye area has a touch of a pink red cast that doesn't quite match up with their other eye, but it's not blatant, and that can be neutralized with the light touch of a brush and a color slider. I think it's adorable that they both have small beauty mark moles on their right cheeks. It's a nice solid portrait of these sweet looking girls.
The artist is Craig Borson. Next, Lady in Red.
People pictures are challenging because our brains expect so much from them. This photo is a good example of that, and it delivers in many ways. It's a well-composed image with the model, the umbrella, and the architectural detail placed skillfully in the frame. The colors are vivid and the tonality is well captured. Vignetting is used very effectively in this photo to enhance the main subject. But to take it to the next level requires local brightening and darkening. Our brains want to see the model's face better and brighter, although here in the room, of course, everything is much brighter, but on the monitor, it's quite dark. Also, the bright banister and spots on the architectural details are distracting from the main subject, and the bright red on the model's lower back also pulls our eyes away from the good stuff, although it doesn't look that bad here in the room. If you Google Avedon, the portrait photographer, Avedon burning and dodging, you'll see the lengths that a master portrait photographer went to in order to finish his people photos. I just love that glowing red umbrella.
The artist is Paul King. Next is Fun with Krampus.
So I think this image is hilarious, and I love it for that. So, because Christmas is supposed to be wholesome, jolly, a delight for children, but this subverts that a bit. The first thing I see is the nutcracker, the bright lights of the Del Oro, and even though Krampus is in the middle with a menacing gaze and a broom held up like a sword, there's so much detail surrounding him that he doesn't stand out immediately. but I like this because he's kind of surprised. And what really cements the hilarity of this image is the terrified expression of the little girl trapped down in the corner. And it's funny because she's in a safe, wholesome environment, and all the other kids just think this is great. I was just maybe darkening the top of the image a bit because that really does pull my eye hard, but I still really enjoy this image.
Artist is Kathy Triola. And next, love is everywhere, especially where you are.
This is a great humorous people photo, but it also gives us a good opportunity to discuss composition. Is there anything going on the bottom third of the image? The edge of the counter and the scarf add a 3D perspective, but I don't think perspective is important to this photograph, so I suggest cropping almost the whole bottom half of the photo off to focus on the main elements. I also found that vignetting helps focus my eyes on the main subjects. Thanks for the chuckle.
And the artist is Angela Appleton. We do have about 31 images left, just so you know, so we will go a little bit over, as the critiques are about 1 minute each. I'm just letting you all know, hopefully we can all stick it out. We're getting there. So here we are with photojournalism, and first up is Junior Buckaroo.
This is a fantastic and dynamic image that tells a very clear story. The shutter speed was fast enough to freeze a lot of the action, but still allows a hint of blur to underscore that there's some fast action happening. The horse and the rider are framed by the fence and the spectators. The rider's face is in shadow and gets a tiny bit lost against the background, but his bright pink shirt helps keep him distinct, and it even matches the shirt of the man in the background, which establishes a personal connection of some sort. His hair and that nicely placed falling hat is a good detail that helps show the intense action. The real star of this image is the horse. The dust cloud beautifully separates him from the background and serves as a second frame. The hind leg creates a strong diagonal line and is one side of a triangle created by the horse and the rider. My eye is drawn between the hooves, churning up the dust and the dirt, and the rider, and then back down to the other side. The details of the horse's muscles straining, the alignment of the head of the front hooves, and the flying mane to match the rider's hair is all just a really excellent image.
Excuse me, the artist is Lori Woodhull. Next is How Humans Kill Wildlife.
Given this category in the title, this image with a hawk seeming to look at the barbed wire works very well to illustrate and educate people about how we might help wildlife. It's also a very well composed image with the offset hawk sharp and well lit, and a nice diagonal formed with the dark rock and the hawk, and pleasing saturated colors. On my monitor, it looks like the shadows were brought up too far, and either increasing contrast and or darkening the shadows made the photo feel more realistic to my eye, which is especially important in this category. Thanks for the awareness.
The artist is Janice Rosner. And next we have Canyon Exuberance.
What I noticed first were the dramatic layers of rock and the curves in the texture, and then I noticed the person that was dwarfed by the enormity of the canyon. I'd also be curious which canyon this is. I think that the rocks in the foreground do a nice job of leading the eye towards the person with their arms stretched up and out, and it's clearly exuberant, perhaps for making it to this point. Because this is in the photojournalism category, and the title is Canyon Exuberance, which puts emphasis on the person, I would recommend cropping it a little bit more to achieve this. And this is an acceptable edit for photojournalism. The figure appears to have been have a bit of a brighter area around them, which could possibly be the shadows pulled up and the brush blended over into the background. Depending on the type of publication this would be going into, that may or may not be permitted. The black and white images are allowed in this category. I checked to see what this would look like in black and white, and I actually liked how it put more emphasis on the elements of the composition, and I could actually see the figure easier. And just as a photo, I think this is an enjoyable image, and I love the feeling of joy from this.
And the artist is Brian Dunbar. Next, as our travel category, first up is Tanzanian Tilapia Farm.
At first, I thought maybe this was a nighttime photograph with the lines along the bottom being light trails, but then I saw that they are strings or wires. But they help make this a great travel photo because it shows us pieces of the world that are different from our own, something unexpected. Compositionally, the person in this photo is almost centered, which is less interesting to my eye, and there's not much going on in the far right of the photo, so I think the composition would be improved by cropping the right 25%. I also found that the look of the photo was improved significantly by adding vignetting. Thanks for taking us to the Zanzibar.
The artist is Lori Woodhall. Next is Orthodox Cemetery and Church with Distant Peaks.
So here's yet another church I recognize, by the way. This one in Ninilchik, Alaska. How the horizon line plays into this image is interesting. The church starts below the horizon line, juts way up, and then it curves around and down and below, and then back up again. And then where this dip in the horizon is, it's like you've got the Orthodox grave markers, and that kind of frames Mount Spur, which is a very active volcano. It last erupted in 1992. So what I find interesting, so in Alaska, nature is dominant. No matter like it or not, it is dominant. But the way this image is, the church placed above, well above the horizon line, it really emphasizes the man-made part of this, and kind of de-emphasizes the natural, which I find to be interesting. And even though that probably wasn't the photographer's intention, because it was just right there in the mountains far away. But I also liked the detail of the grave markers in the front and how they clearly had a relationship to the crosses on the onion domes of the church. The lighting was well, good exposure, maybe a little bit of a vignette, but I really enjoyed this image. Thank you.
The artist is Tom Quinn. Next is Balcos, Madeira, Portugal.
What a great mountain mist scene you brought us. The composition is effective. We are drawn into the canyon for further exploration. The mists are skillfully captured, and except for a patch at the upper right edge, there are no blown out highlights. There's a great feel to this photo. The image looks somewhat too bright on my monitor, like the shadows have been brought up too far, so it's going to look very overexposed here in the room with not many bottom end tones. The lower left and the lower right are by themselves a little too bright, so some local darkening might be employed. But a much easier solution to these and the bright patch in the upper right is to simply employ vignetting, which also helps with overexposure. I love the mysterious mists.
The artist is Fred Finney. Next is Mount Saint Michel, Meanders and Winters.
So this famous landmark is so photogenic, and it gives me more vacation ideas. Those curves are just so phenomenal and graphic, and it's just the kind of thing that anybody would want to spend a long time photographing. I know the photographer probably couldn't have moved over to the left a bit more without getting themselves wet. I do wish they had moved over a little bit or photographed it in landscape mode to catch, to fill in that curve right there. So my eye goes up and then it kind of veers off. And then it looks back, but then it does pull it back towards this. And I think the horizon line, nice and straight, by the way, is well placed, and there's a good proportion between the landscape and then Mount Saint Michel, and then it leaves a nice amount of sky. On my monitor, there was more purple cast in the sky and in the water, and that was really a lovely. It's washed out here, and that's too bad. But I would maybe emphasize that a little bit, and I would maybe try and add some more highlights to it to kind of boost that tonal range. Otherwise, this is an intriguing subject, and it gives a great sense of place. Thank you.
The artist is George Pelpel. Next is Sunset on the Arno.
This is a lovely and elegant photo that reminds me of the finest paintings. The colors and the contrast and the deep feeling in this image that the photographer has captured is exactly what the impressionists were trying to capture. Some might argue that the colors are oversaturated, but I would disagree. They are just right for this scene. The composition is almost perfect to my eyes, but cropping 10% off the top both enhances the composition and eliminates the bright distracting clouds in the upper left. Finally, vignetting has been skillfully employed to lift the photo to the next level of fine art. Superb.
Artist is Barbara Summers. And last in the category, the Canals of Venice.
So I really responded to the soft pastel color palette, then that still blue-green water, and then the quietness of the scene. And Venice is a seriously magical place, and these quiet canals are just as every bit as interesting as the grand sights. The lighting is soft, almost misty, and the focus throughout the scene is sharp. What I didn't respond to quite as well was the wrought iron structure, because I feel it throws off the balance of the image. It's very dark, very strong, hard, and prominent element to the image that isn't always soft. And while a contrast between soft and hard and ancient and modern can work very well, but I feel that in this case, the issue for me is that it doesn't help direct right around the image. I would suggest cropping it out. It would lose a lot of the image, but there's a possible crop like that. And I think that could really, I can think that would help. Even so, the photographer does a great job of giving a sense of place to this amazing city, and I enjoyed looking at this image.
The artist is Bernadette Sylvester. Next, we have Creative Fantasy and just one entry, The Trip.
What could be more photographically boring than a modern airport, right? And aren't we supposed to be striving for tack-sharp images with all of our technology? I love how this photograph turns those ideas upside down. It captures the disorientation of a terminal along with the industrial angular insanity that is modern transportation. We know there are people in the scene, but there are ghosts moving through this shifting world of lights and linoleum. The tonality of this image is marvelous, probably because it was captured on film, and the natural vignetting of what I'm guessing is a low fidelity lens warms my little black and white heart. Purely sublime.
The artist is Ellen Davis. Now we are in the black and white category. First up, Gnarly 20.
Yeah, dude, this is like totally gnarly. That was my immediate thought when I heard the title. I think this is an excellent example of using a natural frame, and I like that it's also a tree, framing a tree, is it really kind of creates a strong relationship between the foreground and the subject. And I like that these branches come down. It's almost like they're trying to root into the ground, and then this branch as well. So it's like it's trying to like swallow that other tree. But I think the tree is nicely placed within that frame. It's like there's a diagonal line there that matches that, and then this space kind of mirrors that as well. My personal preference is for stronger contrast. Or at least give it more highlight to broaden that tonal range, maybe a little bit of a vignette. But I think this is otherwise a nicely done image, and good job. Thank you.
The artist is Ray Lerke. Next is Dance.
I like this photograph more and more the more I looked at it. There's something mesmerizing in the turbulence of flames and smoke, the elemental magic of transformation, and the Krishna-like life that springs from destruction. Using black and white in the photograph strips everything back to the fundamentals, and the tonality of full black to bright whites cultivates interest for eyes. Finally, it's a scene we rarely see, and that novelty adds even more to this image's qualities. Very nice.
The artist is Sheila Ryan. Next is Dan Semmelman.
I love this dignified and highly successful portrait. The angle and the lighting are just gorgeous. My only quibble is that that color is bright, and it's an eyeful because it's the brightest element in this image. And I highly recommend bringing it down to allow even more emphasis on his face, hands, and the sheet music, which creates a triangle that keeps the eye moving around and to take just how lovely this portrait is. The connection between his gaze and the sheet music shows a musician connected with his craft. I actually looked him up, he was really good. Especially Hungarian Rhapsody. And his hand just about to touch the keys creates the tension of anticipation. I think it's so cool how the lighting, how the supporting elements in this image are lit just enough to suggest that they exist. The bench, the barest outline of the piano, and the ascending dots right there, those are actually the hinges of the piano, and I'm kind of embarrassed to say how long it took me to figure that out. But, you know, they kind of had a sense of like notes, you know, ascending into the air and a sense of magic. And I mean, musicians really are magicians, so. And so this is a lovely portrait. Thank you.
The artist is Mike Shea. Next is Soul Lanterns.
I don't know if the double meaning of soul the city and soul the spirit was intended by the photographer, but after seeing the photograph and glancing at the title, that's what popped into my mind. And I think it adds a nice depth to the photograph. The converging lines in this photo help to make it effective because of perspective, but multiple layers of roundness and linearity in all dimensions really make this image work. Even the paper tags help add interest because they are breaks to regular patterns. Note how vignetting was used to keep our eyes from running out the top of the frame as the lanterns get brighter and brighter. Well done.
And the artist was Bernadette Sylvester. Next, balance.
The Zen is strong in this photograph. Contained in that term is the idea of depth through simplicity as exhibited by this photograph. Not only in meaning, but in three-dimensionality, with a little help from depth of field and the choice of black and white. The photographer knows how to control and manage light to make an image glow. And I know you wish that I'd taken a shot of whiskey every time I've used the word vignette tonight, so that I couldn't pronounce it anymore, but I'll say that the photographer has used it magnificently here as one of the best tools to get that glow. Superb.
The artist is Alan Davis. Next is California Primeval.
Dramatic lighting and landscape. It reminds me a bit of Ansel Adams. It's sharp all the way through. It's a nice strong contrast and a great tonal range. The foreground is just enough to give the viewer context and help immerse them in the scene. The horizon line is very high, and I feel it suits this image because there's not a whole lot in the distance that would add to this image, and it just keeps the emphasis on this fantastic canyon. I think that the title suits it very well. It looks like humans have never set foot on this land. The raw, sheared off rock rock faces add great texture, and then they tell an interesting geological story. The trees are wild looking, like they're taking over, though might not have contrasted quite so well without the spotlight from the sun, which contributes to drawing the eye through the image. The sun rays shining down is a great example of a bright light leading line towards the edge of the frame. If this were my image, I might play with darkening the sky a bit in that brighter area to see, but I think this is just a beautiful image, and I spent a lot of time looking at this. Maybe a touch of vignette, but it's an excellent image. Thank you.
The artist is Eric Engels. Next is Dance of Smoke and Light.
So the first thing I noticed were the streaks of the shadows streaming out from the middle. I really like that one point perspective where it just expands out. And I appreciate that, it's like you're able to create something beautiful out of something so destructive. And I always love these types of photographs because they're just very ethereal and see people like forests. I think the exposure was well handled. There's some nice detail. There's a good contrast between rough texture and there's just these really soft, smoky lines. I think black and white was a really good choice for this image because it just emphasizes the line and the form. I might add a little bit of vignette. But otherwise I wouldn't change anything.
The artist is Jonathan Beth. Next, Lizard.
The feel and mood of this photo are really attractive. I love how the snow is like pointillistic static, adding texture and mystery to the photo. The photo also has a great range of tonality from deep blacks to crisp whites. The deepest blacks in the photo are on the tree trunk on the left, so our eyes get drawn there, but the gravity of that area is right up against the left border of the image. And in my opinion, that makes the overall composition feel a little unbalanced. I wish there was just a little more there on the left, to the left of the tree. And this is another photo where I wish I could show you how much vignetting improves both the feel of the photo and the composition, and I encourage the photographer to give it a try.
The artist is Ingrid Lockhart. And finally, in this category, waterfall hump.
Could this be a companion piece to Butts on the Rocks? I am teasing, but I am gonna say hunk a lot. This is a great word. This image has a lot of really strong contrast, which I find very appealing. And even without the hunk, this would be a fine image. The hunk gives it a stronger focal point to give the viewer something to connect with, and it really elevates this image. There are layers of rough textures created by the water, the rocks behind it, and the surface of the water, which contrasts with the smooth texture of the hunk. There's a lot of rather geometrical, a lot of lines created by the water, and contrasting with this are the more organic water lines that very nicely frame the hunk, who has nice organic lines, and both have triangular shapes that help keep the eye moving around. I like that the hunk is not completely framed by the water because it suggests that he is not trapped and he is comfortable. And this is supported by the hunk's relaxed body language. I think that the crop works really well. There is just enough negative space to balance the positive and give it room to breathe. I wouldn't change anything. Nice job.
And the artist is Chris Schuller. And we are getting into the home stretch, just 2 categories left. For color, first one up is The Quiet of Blue.
There's a book by the author Ellen Malloy called The Anthropology of Turquoise, where she explores many aspects of the color blue. One of the aspects is that in our atmosphere, further objects are bluer than closer objects, and our brains use that information to perceive distance. This photo is a good example of that phenomenon. While I search for a strong main element in this image to anchor the composition of it, the title of the photo alerted me that it's all about the quiet of dawn or dusk, and that it's just about enjoying the blue. I tried a little vignetting, and I thought it improved the image. Thanks for sharing.
Our artist is Emily Weissman. Next is Exuding Timeless Charm.
I don't think there's a shinier car than this. I enjoyed taking a closer look at all the reflections of Mill Street, and somehow the photographer managed to avoid being in the reflections. I like the lighting, the subject is interesting, I think the cropping works, although maybe a little smidge more space on the right to really make it dead center. The focus on the car is sharp and crisp, and while I think there is some natural bokeh to the background of the image, the photographer used a blur tool of some sort to soften everything around the car. I can tell because the antenna area and below the front bumper has some very abrupt edges, and these are right there. So it almost makes it look like it's floating, and there's some cloning down here. It doesn't quite, like cloning down at the bottom, there's a line there, so it doesn't quite match up with the rest of the pavement. I would be curious to see how this looks without the blur. And I mean, I kind of like the floating effect. Who wouldn't want a floating car? But I would definitely clean up the edges around, do some more pavement work. Because in the nice details and reflections, I think it would be fun to play with versions of very tight crops and to see what kind of abstracts can be found. Thanks for sharing.
The artist is Jonathan Beth. Next is Just for Fun.
There's a technique in music production called the wall of sound, where sonic space is completely filled with sounds and fuzz, and it can be a very effective way of establishing style and emotion. This photo is like a visual version of that technique, and here it is just as effective in establishing visual appeal through saturated colors and perspective. The clashing color palette is exactly the point, with the foundation of the deep blue sky shining through. Note the successful use of vignetting to keep our eyes contained in the frame. I felt the deep black area in the lower right of the photograph distracted my eyes, and when I cropped the bottom 20% of the photo, I thought the composition was improved. Very nice.
And the artist is Jim Baird. Next is Fast Times, Long Gone.
I really appreciate the simplicity and the complexity of this image. I've never seen glass break like that. It looks like it's surrounded by ice bubbles, or it's a vine of some sort with clear leaves. It's a nice, strong diagonal line, and the blurred background still has plenty of context to tell that this is cracked glass. The line of the steering wheel adds a contrasting diagonal that doesn't overshadow the one in the front. The diagonal of the area between the windshield and the driver's side window is also a diagonal line that works to kind of, draw your eye around the image. The black lighting works beautifully to highlight the cracks in the glass and the space between it and the other side of the car, and that gives it some, gives it some dimensionality. The colors look old and faded, and that helps emphasize the message of an old abandoned vehicle. I really enjoy this image. Nice job.
The artist is Rachel Rosen. Next is Red Bridge, Point, No Point. Is it DC? Yeah.
I like how the chains lead us to the bridge, and then the converging lines of the bridge lead us across it and add three-dimensionality to the image. The composition is very well chosen. The bright reds resonating with the greens also add nice visual appeal. Note how the entire right edge of the image, along with the entire bottom of the image, are very bright in relation to elements in the rest of the image. This is a classic case where vignetting is extremely effective in containing our eyes within the frame, solving the brightness problems and improving the image. I encourage the photographer to give it a try.
Sorry, that was BC, and the artist is Gary Wade. Next is Water Garden.
So the first thing that I really noticed when I was looking at this image were just all the lush, rich textures, and there's got, you've got these spiky areas here, and there's some flat, smooth areas, and so there's a contrast in texture. So, and on my monitor, this, the color, was a lot rich. It was more rich and saturated. That was another thing that I really responded to. And I just felt like it was just, and it really helped emphasize that it is a water garden. I do think the sky is very bright, and it draws the eye up into the corners. So I would recommend maybe try cropping in a little bit, or try, bringing it down and giving a little bit of a vignette. But this looks like a relaxing, magical place to sit and relax. There's a little bench over there. And I really like the sense of place that this gave. Thank you.
The artist is Greg Morrison. And last in the category is Bejeweled Coconut.
Like the Nudra Branch photo we saw earlier in the night, an image with a deep black background gives the impression of objects floating in space, and the technique is used successfully here too. The photographer positioned the camera judiciously to create an interesting and impressive composition, with the branches spiraling off through the top of the frame. Our eyes wonder at the identity of each of the pieces and are pleased by the harmonious arrangement of the whole. The clear dot on the face of the coconut is a final splash of interest that really makes the photo sing.
And the artist is Douglas Hooper. And now we are in our last category, which is phone, and first up is Forest Goddess.
I can feel the joy and exuberance of this image. The light glows, the goddess in the middle absorbs it and lets it flow through. Light and water are both flows of energy. Consider that both hydroelectric and solar power harvest the energy from these flows. This is an excellent example of placing the subject in the middle of the image and making it work, because it gives the image the right balance. And balance, to me, is what this image is really about. The creek and the rocks form a circle, and then the trees above also form a circle. And then the goddess is what joins them together and forms a figure 8. And you see kind of an infinity symbol in there. I like the strong contrast And because everyone has a range of light and dark within, yin and yang, and why I feel that black and white was a good choice for this image. I'd be curious to see what the color version looks like, but I really wouldn't change anything about this beautifully made image. The shadow on the water is interesting, kind of right here. It's like I wasn't sure if it was from her or if it was from a tree above. Lovely work, thank you.
The artist is Chris Schiller. Next is Old Garage.
I love the simple elements of this photo that combine to make an excellent composition, and I love the sense of light and shadow that is so elegantly captured. The dark curve of the tree is a powerful anchor for the whole. Note how the lower left edge of the image gets lighter as it approaches the frame, and once again, I think that vignetting would help improve that a little bit. Since we're in the phone category, I'll mention Photoshop Express as a free app that has an array of useful tools for processing phone images, including vignetting. A photographer might give it a try to improve phone images.
And the artist is Morris Freeman. Next is Sea Ranch Abstract.
So no matter how long I looked at this, I couldn't get a sense of scale, which is something I like in an abstract image. This makes me feel like it's not something I want to touch because it looks like it could be some combination of sticky, squishy, slimy, or snuffy. And I think it's the yellow-green color that heavily plays into that. Based on the title, there's a good chance that could be some sort of algae or seaweed. I converted this to a black and white version with warm tone. Really shifted my perception a lot. There was more emphasis on the swirls and shapes, and some of them looked like they were dancing spirits. So maybe try to explore like black and white, adding a little contrast, or maybe a vignette. Thank you.
And the artist is Fred Finney. Next is Last Train to Nowhere.
The biggest appeal of this image to me is the visual contrast of the industrial to the natural, with the razor sharp edges of the train cutting through the softened vegetation and water. The hovering clouds also have a particular appeal. The composition works well and the tonality is excellent. The graffiti adds just a little bit of organic nature and visual interest to the train without having the image be about the graffiti. And we suggestion I make for improvement is to add a little bit very solid.
The artist, excuse me, sorry. The artist is Mike Boitzman. And next is Beach Vines.
Like the Krampus image, I am just delighted by this. It's charming, it's playful. There's a little flavor of sadness too. I think of a soldier storming the beaches of Normandy, or a child that lost a toy, and a reminder of how much plastic there is in the world. But I'm sure World War II soldiers weren't against plastic Coke discs and giant seashells. That would have been a very strange war. It feels like the photographer had a great time creating this little scene and then photographing it. I like the high horizon line because it's just enough to add environmental context, and the broken shell beach provides a nice color texture contrast to the far reaches of the background. I also applaud the photographer for picking this toy soldier against the shell background to keep it fully separated from the dark rocks above, because they have a similar color to the soldier. That little line of separation is so good. Overall, a solid image that I thoroughly enjoyed.
And the artist is Laura Kainman. And our last image in the category and of the evening, Buddha at home.
There's appeal in this photo of the combination of the yellow green of the moss and the blue copper green of the statue, along with the texture of the tree bark next to the folds of the Buddha's robe. Compositionally, this photo might have worked better if the photographer had taken a little step to the right. This would perhaps have moved the blurry tree in the upper left out of the frame and have offset the statue in the frame, move more to the left, and put it and the rock in the lower right on a nice diagonal. It does look like vignetting was used to improve the image, and for that, and for the last time I'll mention it tonight, we can all applaud.
And that concludes the critique. Thank you again to our volunteer critiquers, Ellen Davis and Chris Schiller. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you all for being here tonight. And now you can see why we need all of those
guys
extra
are
votes to get.
fabulous.
That says, safe home.